The story begins with Zahid bringing a stolen temple treasure to Rosie, who is imprisoned. He suggests Rosie take it, revealing how the treasure can return in time. He says he might be able to use it, unlike him, who does not possess divine power. Rosie argues that her divine power is too weak to activate the relic, and only a high priest could do that. But she gets interrupted as Zahid painfully collapses on the floor. With a muffled breath, he regrets not being able to get Rosie out of here or bring down the temple. He apologizes for not keeping his promise just before he becomes motionless. Tears fill Rosie's eyes as she gently ushers Zahid to open his eyes and stay with her. Zahid is the Duke of Dyfenril, the master of the wolf divine beast who was trapped here with Rosie. He was also the last person in this world who was precious to our female protagonist. Once again, the temple has taken someone dear from her. Rosie's name has changed 3 times in this life. Until she was 5, when she lived in the orphanage, she was called Rosie without a surname. After her divine power manifested and she was sent to the temple, she was given a new name, Rosie Tryon. Tryon was a surname given to apprentices with truly little divine power. There were so many like her scattered everywhere, mostly doing the temple's menial chores. And then, in the spring of her 11th year, Rosie met Julian Note, her biological brother. He apologized to Rosie for taking so long to find her, revealing how he had just learned of her existence. He disclosed how they have different fathers, but their mother is the daughter of Count Note. And thus, from that day onward, she became Rosie Note. The Note family is the wealthiest in the empire. Taking on that surname was something Rosie had never even imagined. In addition, the Note family openly opposed the temple. But to her younger self, things like family background did not matter at all. The fact that she finally had a family who loved her alone made Rosie feel like the happiest person alive. Julian embraced his sister, promising never to let her go through what he did. He hoped for her to live a peaceful life just like any ordinary 11-year-old. And so, Rosie followed Julian to the Note estate. It turned out Rosie's brother, Julian, was an extraordinary man. From what Rosie heard, among ordinary people, excluding priests and mages, he was considered the strongest. In addition, Julian was so talented in every way that he surpassed all their relatives to become the heir of the Note family. As his cherished younger sister, Rosie was showered with all sorts of care and protection, living her days in happiness. But that happiness did not last long. 14 months after she became Rosie Note, Julian suffered an unexpected accident. He lost his memory and could no longer recognize Rosie. For the first time in her life, Rosie saw her brother looking at her like she was a nuisance. The strongest man and she were clearly worlds apart. She guesses he must already be struggling with the weight of his memory loss, and she could not be a burden to him any longer. Due to her upbringing, Rosie's self-esteem had always been low. As a result, she left the estate and returned to the temple. However, that turned out to be the worst decision of her life. Rosie was thrown into the lab immediately and used as a test subject. It was as if they had been waiting for her. The temple locked her up in her prison and subjected her to all sorts of experiments. And so, from the age of 12 until now, Rosie has spent the last 10 years trapped in an underground prison. During that time, her brother, Julian, died, and their family fell into ruins. All of it was the temple's doing. Yet even knowing that, locked in this prison, Rosie was powerless to do anything. One day, while she was enduring those hellish times, Zahid, who had secretly infiltrated the temple, found her locked in the prison. Since then, Zahid often risked his life to find her and become her friend. Without him, she would never have been able to endure this miserable life. But now he is dead, leaving behind the holy relic that could turn back time. Rosie guesses her weak spiritual power cannot activate it and wonders if regression is possible. But she wants to turn back time so badly and prays for her to regress. She finds it unbearable to do nothing while watching her loved ones die. She is aware that she has been powerless her entire life. If she is given another chance, Rosie swears she will never let this happen again. She remembers her kind older brother, who cherished her the most in this world. Then there was Zahid, who came to meet her in this deep underground prison. If she can return to the past and change everything, Rosie swears to protect everyone and destroy the temple. And with that, the relic begins to glow brightly, and a mana circle surrounds Rosie. She loses consciousness and is transported back to the past. She recognizes the familiar room as the annex of Count Note's estate. She checks the date in the newspaper, and it is exactly 10 years ago. Rosie is astounded and wonders what on earth happened. How did the sacred artifact activate with her insignificant magical power? She wonders if she was so pitiful and desperate that it showed mercy. No matter what the reason is, she knows solving the things that will come ahead is more important. Her first mission is to save her brother Julian, who is 12 years older than her. After losing his memory in an accident, he became a clueless country bumpkin troublemaker. His relatives, as if scheming, took all his fortune. Then, after leaving the estate while injured, he was assassinated by an assassin from the temple. For someone once called the greatest, it was such a futile death. The fact that Rosie is currently in Count's estate means her brother is still alive. Now she needs to protect him so that such things do not happen. Next, she must meet Zahid Daifinrol. Thanks to the sacred artifact Zahid gave her, Rosie was able to get this second chance at life. She wants to meet him as soon as possible, if only to repay his kindness. If it was 10 years ago, Rosie knew Zahid must be in a difficult situation. But right now, he does not know her. If she goes to the Duke of Daifinrol's estate, she will just be turned away at the door. Although she misses Zahid so much, she will wait for the right time. The last thing she must do is protect the Note family and take revenge on the temple. The people from the temple did not just torment Rosie, they killed all her precious people. This time, she does not plan to let things go their way. To do that, the Note family must not fall. Not long after Julian's death, their grandfather, Count Note, also passed away. After that, the incompetent relatives who inherited the family were completely ruined by the temple. Rosie is aware that she needs the backing of the Note family if she wants to oppose the temple. That means she must stop relatives from taking over. Her attention diverts as her maid, Heidi, worriedly barges inside. She reveals how Lord Julian has regained consciousness, but is diagnosed with partial amnesia. She discloses how his last memory is from 7 years ago. This reminds Rosie that today is the day she left the estate. Right now, Julian's mental age is not 24 but 17. She recalls how her brother told him how he had a rough adolescence. He described himself as a reckless, aggressive black dragon brat. In other words, he is not the doting brother Rosie knew. He has turned into a total delinquent brat. Rosie decides to steel herself now that she aims to protect her brother, and so, she wishes to see him. Meanwhile, Julian was having a hard time comprehending that he was 24, not 17. His aide, Sholba, was by his side, trying to make him understand his predicament. Julian feels like he is losing his mind. His life as the only son of a shabby countryside butcher was miserable. His father, a gambling addict, and his mother, an alcoholic, fought every other day. His mother was the daughter of a wealthy family, and his father was a servant working there. They had a secret affair. Julian was conceived, and they went away to this place. In the end, Julian's mother abandoned him and left home. He thinks it might be that he went through such a stormy adolescence in this chaotic family environment the townspeople all called him the butcher's delinquent. Then one day he woke up. Not only was he suddenly 24, but apparently his mother was actually the daughter of Count Note. Sholba explains that Lord Julian was actually the grandson of the Count. At 19, he learned the truth and entered the Count's estate, receiving the Note name. Over 5 years, he grew remarkably in various fields and became the strongest. It was only natural that he was appointed as the Count's successor. This is now the 15th time that they have had this exact conversation. But Julian was still unable to comprehend all this. He says he cannot get used to the formal way Sholba talks with him because he was his childhood friend in the past. Sholba asks if he should also revert back to being 17 and speak to him bluntly as he used to. Julian agrees. As soon as he gains approval, Sholba grows enraged and tells him to stop repeating the same question as a damn parrot and just believe what people are telling him. He says he is barely holding back from smacking Julian upside the head right now, and tells him not to push his luck. Though Julian cannot believe it, all of this is real, and his body is completely wrecked. They get interrupted as the housekeeper reveals that Lady Rosie is here. Sholba worries over it while Julian wonders who she is. Rosie assures her she already knows everything and just wants to see her brother. Hearing this, Julian's brother completely stops processing. His eyes widen as he wonders what the girl just said. It is because he does not have a younger sibling. A while back, Rosie wore a hairpin her brother gifted her. Before leaving to see him, she wrote something on a parchment. Back in the present, Julian questions who the little kid is. He wonders if this is a joke. Before her regression, Rosie ran away the moment she heard those words. Julian's cold, distant gaze felt so unfamiliar to her. After that, she never saw her brother again. She spent 10 years locked in the temple's underground prison, regretting that moment. That means Rosie wants to change the future. She must act differently here. Unfair. She greets Julian, introducing herself as Rosie Note. She explains that though they may have different fathers, she is still his sister. Julian stares at Rosie and asks how old she is. Rosie explains how their mother ran away from home when he was 12. It was because she had an affair with another man and got pregnant with him. Julian is shocked and wonders what kind of person their mother is. He is now realizing why she left without a word back then. He grew angry that such a little girl knows the dirty family business and wondered which loudmouth idiot went around spelling like this. Unfazed, Rosie reveals how he told her himself the day they first met. She reveals that their mother left her at an orphanage ages ago and never came back. Julian is surprised that he is that loudmouth idiot. Rosie then reveals that the one who brought her here after all was him. She smiled and revealed that he cherished her and even promised to take responsibility for her. She then revealed that she was exactly 12 years younger than him. Julian sighs heavily and mutters how he can barely take care of himself right now, and then there is a little kid he is supposed to take care of. Furious, Shulba immediately stops him from speaking and tells Rosie not to take it to heart, as the guy is spewing nonsense. Rosie asks Shulba if it is okay for him to just shut his superior up like that. Shulba says it will be worse when he regains his memories and realizes how he spoke to his sister. Frustrated, Julian questions what he is supposed to do. He rants over how he woke up and suddenly became a noble. And not just any noble, but supposedly one of the strongest in this entire region. He says how he does not know a thing about being a noble, and he finds it terrifying. He protests, saying he wants to go back to the butcher shop. He asks if it is not normal to freak out that he does not know what he's supposed to do, and now he has gotten a kid tagging along. Seeing Julian lose his temper like this, right in front of her, Rosie never would have believed it before. She remembers Julian describing himself as a teenager. She knows it is time to accept that reality. The cold, unshakable Julian, who once commanded the Note household and stood against the temple, is gone. Realizing he has been too harsh, Julian coughs and begins to speak. But Rosie interrupts him and agrees that his brain is completely empty. He is a clueless brat and seeing it in person just confirms it. But she explains that this family is not the kind of place where a clueless brat can survive, especially now with their grandfather still in recovery. She sighs and tells Heidi to give him the contract they drafted earlier. Julian sees the contract, which states that Julian must hereby transfer all his assets under his name to Rosie. She hands him his seal and tells him to stamp it right now. However, Julian feels like something is not right. He thinks of her as a little kid obsessed with money. He says she is addicted to spending with all the jewelry and dresses. Rosie calmly reveals that her brother bought this for her. Julian turns speechless. Julian then asks what she will do if he leaves the Count's estate. He reveals he is planning to abandon everything and return to the butcher's shop. He asks if she would consider coming with him. After a pause, Rosie says she has no intention of leaving the Count's estate. Julian understands. Of course, anyone would prefer living in a noble's house over a shabby butcher's shop. He thinks it is better for both to part ways here. He gets cut off from his thoughts as Rosie urges him to stamp the seal. Julian grows annoyed and seals it with magic, telling her to spend it wisely. But he feels kind of bitter. From what he had heard, before he lost his memories, he was ridiculously devoted to his sister. And yet, this kid's first instinct is to grab the money. He wonders if it could be that their bond was only held together because he kept buying her jewelry and dresses. Just then Julian heard a loud stomping noise, and a bunch of men barged inside the room looking for him. They show him different documents, telling him to stamp them by reading. Julian finds the words too complicated. The men tell him that it is nothing serious and he should just stamp them. Julian feels overwhelmed, and Shulba tells everyone to step back. However, they push aside saying it is a matter of life and death. The men continue fighting while Rosie shows Shulba the contract she had Julian sign earlier. Shulba tells the men how they are wasting their time as Lord Julian has already transferred all of his wealth to Lady Rosie. The men check the contract and grow disappointed. Furious that Julian only cares about his sister, they leave the room. Rosie adds that now the situation has changed, so they must be running back to their respective masters. She says they cannot do anything with the documents they prepared now. Julian does not understand what she is saying. Rosie explains that the masters are their dear relatives, the ones who had their succession rights taken away by him. If Julian stamped those documents, all his wealth would have been transferred to them. They took his memory loss as a perfect opportunity to do so. Shulba is impressed by her wisdom and praises her. Rosie says they are probably the happiest about what happened to her brother. There is no way she would give them something good on top of that. Julian knew the girl was right. If it were not for her, he would have carelessly stamped the seal just because they said it was urgent. He did not even know he had wealth until now. So, the reason she prepared her transfer document was not out of greed. He wonders if she could have predicted the situation already. Shulba asks Rosie what they should do now, as those people will come straight for her now. He asks if she will be okay handling their constant barging. Rosie smiles and says she would still be better off than her sickly brother. She tells them not to worry, as even she knows that she cannot handle this alone. Julian is impressed and wonders if he did all of this for him. Now that urgent matters are settled, Rosie suggests to Julian that they start their real conversation. First, Rosie expresses her grief for what happened to Julian and says she does not know what to do. But Julian says it is too late to say that. Rosie tells him to try to understand, and the situation is too bad for her to just sit and be sad. Julian says he is leaving here no matter what, but if she wants, she can come with him. He explains that it will not be as luxurious as his place, but at least there will not be guys like that. Rosie interjects and asks when his body will fully recover. Julian frowns and asks who she took after to be this bad at listening. Unfazed, Rosie says it is him. She also tells him not to keep calling him kiddo. Julian is left speechless and without a comeback. After a while, he says that the doctor said it would take him a few months to recover completely. But he says that even after he recovers, he probably won't be able to wield the sword like before. As far as lost memories are concerned, there is no telling when they will return. Either way, he thinks it would be best if he just went back home. If people like those from earlier keep coming after him, he will not be able to handle it. Rosie tells him not to worry, as that will not happen again. She says it is because he has lost all his wealth and is completely broke now, so there is nothing left for the relatives to take. Julian is taken aback and thanks her for making him broke. Rosie says it is nothing compared to what he did for her. She also tells him not to think about leaving, as their grandfather cares about him a lot. Hence, this is the safest place for him. Rosie explains that the relatives are only bringing documents because they are inside. If they were outside, they would have brought swords. Julian is shocked by the extremity of the situation. Shulba asks how she plans to respond from now on. He says Rosie may seem like an easy target for them, considering how little she knows about the ways of the world. Rosie tells Shulba not to worry because if words do not work, she will just fight with the power of wealth. Julian is shocked to hear her. Back in his younger days, he got into a fair share of fights and met plenty of strong people. But he finds this kid insanely strong. The fact that she says things like that so seriously makes her seem even stronger. Rosie then excuses herself before warning Julian that there is not a single relative here he can trust. But she assures him not to worry, as she will protect him. She then thanks him for waking up and exits. Later, Julian lay in his bed in deep wonderment. He wonders why Rosie would even come back tomorrow to see a broke man who lost everything. He asks Shulba if he and the kid got along well. Shulba discloses that he doted on her embarrassingly a lot, which is why he was honestly surprised. Until now, Lord Julian had hidden Rosie away in the annex and treated her like a treasure, so he assumed she was very delicate. But after seeing her today, her ability to assess the situation was incredible. Julian seems impressed and asks if she takes after him. Shulba looks at him in disgust and disagrees. Shulba elaborates that Julian has the face of a bad-tempered beast while Rosie looks like an adorable small animal. The only similarities between the two are their silver hair and green eyes. Julian recalls the sorrowful look on the girl's face and feels a pang of sympathy for her loss of a caring older brother. He thinks that, in that case, the fortune left behind by the 24-year-old Julian note could serve as some form of compensation. It seems fitting to pass on money he never knew existed to a sister he never knew he had, allowing him to feel some sense of peace. He asks how much wealth he has. He wonders if his immense wealth should be around 5,000 gold since he was the heir of a count, and he thinks that should be enough to buy a decent house on the outskirts of the capital. But when Shulba shows him the amount, he is astounded. It was around 137 billion gold. On the other hand, the maids gossip about Zahid breaking off his fourth engagement. Meanwhile, Zahid is in a bad state but refuses to give up. The Note family lives together on this vast estate. Even if the relatives eye Julian with greed, this is the safest place for them. Rosie thinks no one would dare kill him in her grandfather's mansion. Her maternal grandfather, Caliban Note, is a great imperial tycoon. He started from nothing and amassed an immense fortune, securing the highest status possible through wealth and marriage, a count's title. In short, he was a man of unrivaled ambition, utterly ruthless and without compassion. However, Caliban carries a dark secret. He was once a temple slave, and so, during his years as a slave, contempt and hatred built up inside him for the temple. It was only natural that his greatest goal in life was the temple's downfall. Maybe that is why Julian had Rosie away in the guest house and protected her. After all, Rosie carried the blood of the clerics her grandfather despised so much. Julian had told her that he had investigated and found out that her father seemed to have been a low-ranking cleric temporarily assigned to the village. Rosie guesses this must be why she manifested holy power, but that holy power was the size of a teaspoon. Julian then explained that it is best if she does not stand out as their grandfather hates the temple. He suggested she avoid running into the relatives as well. Julian promised not to let their grandfather or their relatives get in her way. Thanks to him, Rosie barely saw her grandfather or the relatives herself. But now that Julian, the thorn in their side, has lost his memory, they must be overjoyed. Her thoughts get disrupted as a cold voice asks her to stop. She remembers how she met this man in a past life at this time too. It was Royston. Note: he is the only son of her eldest uncle. He thought he would inherit the family, but when Julian ruined his plans, he developed a deep resentment towards them. Royston yells at Rosie about how this place was never meant for her. He asserts that she packs her things and goes back to the temple. In her past life, Rosie thought Royston was right. No one here wanted her around, and she, too, felt she did not deserve to be. That is why she just let Royston hit her without resisting. But this time, Rosie does not plan on just sitting here like before. She feigns pain and falls to the floor. This grabs the attention of the relatives' subordinates, who then run towards her to take the fortune. Rosie puts up a performance, revealing how she was planning to give the inheritance to her uncle. But with Royston's acts, she has to rethink it. She then puts Royston in his place, and rightfully so. In her previous life, Rosie did not value herself and thought all the love Julian gave her had disappeared. So she ended up making a big mistake. But now she remembers the love her brother gave her. That memory still exists in some way, and she does not know it. She tells Royston how he cannot hurt her with his words. No matter her background or whether Julian remembers her or not, she will be proud. It is because now she will protect Julian, the person who cherished her. Later, Rosie ponders over a way to protect her brother and the inheritance. She is sure that the only person who has enough power to protect him in this mansion is their grandfather, so he needs to return as soon as possible. After hearing about Julian's accident, grandfather, who was abroad for business, rushed back to the Empire. But on his way, he got caught in an unexpected landslide and was stranded for a long time. By the time he finally made it back to the mansion, Julian was already dead. Rosie knows she needs to find a way to bring her grandfather back as soon as possible and earn his trust. That is the best way to increase her influence in this family. Despite the setback, her brother retains the potential to become the Count's heir. His previous success demonstrates his ability to overcome adversity and gain a few remarkable results. She knows she must protect Julian in this house no matter what until he seizes control of the family and brings down the temple. On the other hand, Julian's uncle scolds Royston for messing things up. He is the eldest son of Count Caliban. Note: he knew if he had that money, he could have paid off all his debts in one go. He decides to seize the fortune as soon as possible before his father returns. He orders for his father's return to be delayed by any means necessary. He orders bridges to be cut off and the carriage to be sabotaged. Rosie tries her best to delay the stamping matters, saying that she did not learn how to read. Rosie reads the headline in the newspaper, "Never-ending tragedy of the Duke of Dyfenrol." She smiles as she sees Zahid and how he looks as a child. There were 4 ducal families in the empire. The heads of the 4 great noble houses each possessed the power to command a divine beast, one of water, fire, wind, or earth. Among them, the head of the house that wields the fire beast is none other than Zahid Dyfenrol. For generations, the leaders of these ducal families were born with immense magical power, and because of that, their divine beasts had to absorb and use the excess mana to keep it in balance. But in the past few decades, something changed. The power of the divine beasts began to weaken. Unable to absorb their master's overflowing mana, the energy had nowhere to go. Trapped inside their own bodies, the uncontrolled magic clashed violently, bringing unbearable pain that eventually drove them to madness. There were only 2 known ways to prevent this. One was a sedative developed by the magic tower, but due to difficulties in obtaining the necessary ingredients, the tower could no longer produce it. The other option was using a powerful divine force from a high-ranking priest to suppress the pain. With no other choice, the Dyfenrol royal family turned to the temple for help. But the temple demanded something in return. They wanted the divine beast. Zahid resisted until the very end. But in the end, his divine beast was taken from him. The temple imprisoned the divine beast along with Rosie, and they carried out endless experiments. They forced Rosie to communicate and figure out how to connect with the divine beast. It was for the High Peace Priest to become its true master. Rosie lost all sense of time, trapped in a constant cycle of experiments. That is, until one day Zahid sneaked into the temple to see his divine beast. Thanks to him, she finally learned that her real age was 19 and she had been imprisoned for 7 long years. After that, Zahid returned to the underground prison every full moon when divine power was at its weakest. For 3 years they talked about everything: his story, her story, the past and present of the world beyond these walls. Before her regression, Rosie was in love with Zahid. She never got the chance to confess, But deep down, she knew. And she believes Zahid felt the same way. Thanks to Zahid, Rosie learned so much about the world beyond those walls. And now, she finally knows which path to take. She promises to find her first savior, and save him. She knew with Zahid's fourth broken engagement, this was her chance. And so, she formally requests an engagement with him. Rosie plans to stick close to Zahid from a young age in this life. She hopes that over time, they naturally fall in love and get married. Her thoughts get disrupted as Heidi appears from behind and asks when she became so skilled at writing. Rosie takes a deep pause. Originally, she never learned how to read while she was here. Her brother hired countless private tutors for her, but nothing worked. In the end, much later, she was finally able to learn to read with Zahid's help. It took her a very long time, though. Therefore, Rosie knows it is only natural that Heidi finds it strange. She tells her to keep it a secret for now, as she is pretending she cannot read to buy some time in front of her relatives. Heidi becomes determined and agrees. She praises Rosie for planning everything out in advance. As Rosie makes her way out, she bumps into Royston, but he awkwardly walked past her without a word. This makes Rosie realize he must have gotten scolded. Rosie makes her way to Julian's room and sees him sleeping despite broad daylight. Shulba greets her, revealing how he was just in the middle of waking up Julian. Though he was a childhood friend who shared a close bond with her brother, Shulba remained professional and loyal to the very end. Now Rosie sees it in person. Before her regression, Shulba followed her brother when he left the mansion and protected his master to the very end until he died. In conclusion, he is truly someone she can trust. She asks him to bring her brother's seal. She wakes up her brother then, telling him to stamp the seal and go back to sleep if he wants. Julian takes note of the brooch she is wearing and says it is quite tacky for her age. But he grows speechless as Rosie reveals that this is a brooch her brother bought for her for the first time. Julian falls back, saying he is sleepy, but Rosie hands him the parchment, telling him to seal and infuse it with magic. Shulba's eyes widen as he reads the contents. It was an engagement request. Julian is also surprised as he hears it. Shulba rants about how Lord Julian will drown in misery if she mentions engagement. Rosie assures that it is just a request and nothing major will happen. She then excuses herself, informing Julian she will come to see him later. Upon asking why, Rosie smiles and says it is because she wants to. At that moment near the solemn region, Caliban Note cannot wait to see his grandson. The scene shifts to Rosie feeding her brother. Julian tells her to tell him more about the engagement she mentions this morning. Rosie says there is nothing more to say, and she just proposes to someone she wants to get engaged to. Shulba tries to assure Julian it will not work out, but he remains angry. Rosie asks why he cares when he is going back to his hometown alone. This shuts him up. Julian says he cannot explain it, but he is angry. It feels like an instinctive repulsion. Shulba shivers in fear, muttering how some old instincts remain. He knows he will die if Julian's memories return. He says he cannot genuinely wish for Julian to regain his memories again. Julian shifts the conversation and asks about the people that crowded Rosie. Rosie tells him not to worry, as others do not know she directly took his property. They just think she is a naive kid who suddenly struck rich, so they do not guard against her. Julian thinks of her as a really crazy, tough girl. But no matter how one looks at it, she is just a kid. People are already making a fuss over that money. She suggests that he keep the money as it is dangerous for her. He suggests that he can inherit it after she becomes an adult. However, Rosie refuses. She reveals to her brother how there was a saying at the orphanage where she stayed for a while when she was young. I will keep that money safe for you until you grow up. They were told never to trust words like that. And if someone adds, I will invest in it and make it grow, run away immediately. Julian admits that the orphanage taught some good lessons. Rosie asks if he knows what bonds and promissory notes are, but Julian's mind remains blank. Rosie elaborates that when he gains more knowledge and becomes more trustworthy than her, she will give it back to him. She then suggests he study a bit now that there is no one bothering her. Julian refuses to do so. Rosie says he might turn out to be a genius, making him speechless. He eventually gives in, saying he will give it a try since there is not much to do while stuck in his room. He wonders why he feels so weak when this kid gets gloomy. Shulba then reveals how he heard some news when he went to the main building earlier about that money. It seems that her property issue will be brought up as an agenda item for the upcoming monthly meeting. The amount is so large that the elders are likely to decide on the inheritance at the meeting. Rosie already expected that this would happen. In the Note family, a meeting is held once a month to decide on various matters. Rosie's relatives will use every means possible to take her property at this month's meeting. Without grandfather, it will be a tough battle if they unite. Julian is stunned and asks why the adults get to decide that. Rosie guesses that they probably think Julian's money is ultimately Note's property. Since she is still a child, they will say they will keep the money until she grows up. In the end, the three elder relatives plan to split the money among themselves. This irritates Julian further, and he protests that it is his money. Rosie tells him not to worry as she has a plan. She then clarifies that it is her money, not his. She promises to keep his money safe and even multiply it several times over. Julian points out how it is the same advice said in the orphanage. Later, Rosie asks Shulba for a favor, telling him to send a message to her grandfather. Shulba reveals that the Count will arrive at Solemn soon, so he will send a letter through the communication port there. Rosie knew Teppan came after Solemn. Teppan is where there was a landslide that stranded Rosie's grandfather. To ensure his swift return, Rosie plans to change his route. She hands a message to Shulba to send to her grandfather. She also advises him not to tell the relatives. Shulba checks the message, stating how Rosie would like to buy something from him. She requests him to make her a bracelet out of seashells on his way back. She promises to pay a satisfactory reward for it. Shulba mentions how it was the first business item the Count came up with while working as a sailor in his youth. Rosie agrees, saying this is why the Count will pay attention to her message. She tells Shulba to just wait and see, as she will definitely catch her grandfather's eye from now on. On the other hand, Count Caliban reads how Julian has safely regained consciousness, but is suffering from partial memory loss. He then looks at the letter from Rosie and is taken aback. He only saw the child from a distance once and wondered what business she would have without. He remembers how protective Julian was of his younger sister. He hid her away in the annex, not even introducing her to the family. He remembers how she was a novice priest with the temple's bloodline. He wonders if Julian thought he would dislike the child, which is why he hired her. From what he saw, she did not even go to the temple of her own will. It is not like he is such an unreasonable person. As he reads the letter further, he orders the subordinate to change their route immediately. His subordinate asks if he is really changing the route because of a request from a granddaughter he has never even spoken to. The Count points out that this is a business proposal. He says he has always upheld the principle in business that no matter who the client is, he always accepts their first desperate transaction. He says he can judge a person's worth later. Besides, how could he refuse when his own granddaughter is willing to pay the price? He orders preparations to depart. That night, Shulba has a nightmare in which Julian regains his memories and kills him for letting his Rosie get engaged. He ponders over the matter deeply in the morning. As far as he knows, Rosie has no ties to the Dyfenril ducal family. He wonders if she is trying to solidify her position within the family through this marriage proposal to protect Julian. If it succeeds, there is no doubt it will be a valuable move that even the Count has been eyeing. The young Note family and the long-established Dyfenril ducal family, though both are noble houses, their status is worlds apart. For example, the Grand Nobles Assembly, where only the 4 great ducal families can participate. For the Count, joining that assembly has been a long-held ambition. But no matter how much they clawed their way up, the inbound limitations of their lineage remained unshakable. However, if they become the betrothed family of Dyfenril by supporting the still young Duke of Dyfenril, the Count could finally enter the Grand Nobles Assembly. On top of that, the young Duke of Dyfenril was fated to lose his sanity due to magical backlash. Plus, according to Dyfenril's internal laws, which grant significant authority to the betrothed family, when the Duke is absent, the Note family will gain even greater power and influence. He feels sad that Rosie must make such a decision even though she is young. She always thought of her as soft, harmless, and adorable, but she is thoughtful and intelligent. He guesses it was because of Julian's overprotectiveness that she never had the chance to show her capabilities. In all truth, Shulba felt completely hopeless when he found out Julian's memories had regressed to when he was 17. But he never expected Lady Rosie to take such bold action. His attention diverts as he enters the dining hall and sees Julian boasting about his intelligence to his sister. He reveals smugly how he just flips through pages instantly as if he already knows the content. Shulba smiles, certain that if Julian regains his memories, he will probably cry for a whole month just thinking about how Rosie used to serve him meals. In the meantime, the Count's eldest son is happy to see the heavens aiding his mission. He reads about the landslide in Teppan and is happy that his father will not be able to attend this month's assembly. He worked for him to take as long as possible to return. In the meantime, he plans to ruin the apprentice and the butcher while he can and get back what he lost. He also decides to get rid of them. Later that night, Shulba discreetly makes his way into Rosie's room as commanded. Before that, he informs Julian about it. Julian proudly boasts that his recovery is brilliant as he has been shifted into a wheelchair. He suggests going with Shulba as Rosie might not be aware he can move easily now. Despite Shulba's reluctance, Julian makes his way out. Shulba hides his rage. On the other hand, Rosie removes her earrings. She thought Julian would remember her for a moment as he saw the things he bought for her. With that thought in mind, she changed her jewelry and outfits every time she went to see her brother. Just like Heidi said, maybe seeing the things her brother gave her will jog his memory. Even if it is just a tiny hope, she wants to cling to it. She remembers how her brother had expressed that neither of them was lucky when it came to parents, so he suggested they should be each other's fortune. He made her promise that she would push his wheelchair when he gets old and retires first. As she is reminded of their precious memories, tears fill her eyes. She remembers how Julian promised to love her no matter what. She looks at all the gifts and wonders what to wear tomorrow. She is grateful that her brother survived. If she could be by his side and keep him alive, that was enough for Rosie. Julian remains frozen in place as he silently hears his sister's cries while she calls out his name. Later, Shulba meets Rosie. He remembers showing Julian coming back to his room earlier. Rosie orders Shulba to liquidate her brother's fortune starting tomorrow. And right before the monthly meeting, he must invest the entire 137 billion into magic stones. Shulba remembers how Julian said he has to be on the kid's side when he isn't there anymore. And so, Shulba obliges and leaves. Rosie is aware that the monthly meeting is in a week. If he receives her letter, the Count will return before the meeting ends. She decides to hold on a little longer until the monthly meeting. Days passed by in the blink of time, and before she knew it, the day of the monthly meeting soon arrived. The Count's eldest son was happy that his father had not been able to return on time. He was sure that Rosie would probably be trembling to be in a meeting for the first time like this. Soon, Rosie makes her entry and introduces herself. The man was shocked to see her calmer than he expected her to be. He thought she would not be able to handle the atmosphere being just a kid. Could it be that she has been pretending to be foolish all this time to stall, making sure he could not do anything before the monthly meeting? Even if that is the case, the result will not change. The meeting soon begins. Rosie's uncle mentions that Julian transferred all his assets to her. He points out that it is far too much money for a child to handle. He says that once the money is tied to Note's name, they cannot allow it to be carelessly circulated in the world. He suggests the elders of the family take charge for now, invest it properly, and when Rosie reaches adulthood, return it to her. Rosie had expected to hear this phrase. He says that they will gather the family's opinions first, and the decision will be made by majority vote. Rosie expected this, but it is still so underhanded. Before the voting can commence, Rosie interrupts, saying the money is already gone, so there is no need for that. She revealed how she invested all 137 billion into magic stones yesterday. This enraged the other relatives. The Count's daughter, Monica, points out how the price of magic stones is plummeting day by day. She reveals how her brother recently discovered a huge Ramsek mine at the temple that is way cheaper and more effective than magic stones. Everyone lashes out at Rosie. Rosie says she has been telling them all along. She asked why everyone was so angry considering it was not their money to begin with. Enraged, Rosie's uncle approaches her with the intention of hitting her. But before he can do so, someone throws a rock at him. Rosie hears Julian's voice confronting their uncle. An hour ago, Julian's doctor, Peter, was astounded to see such an incredible recovery. Julian thinks about the girl but is still unable to remember anything. He wonders why she is crying so desperately and pitifully. He meets with Shulba, who seems quite worried. Upon asking, Shulba reveals that in this meeting everyone is going to try to seize Rosie's fortune. He wonders how she will manage everything alone without the Count. Julian thinks about how a child who barely looks 9 years old is going to attend such a dangerous meeting. This worried him. When he first heard he had a sister, he did not take it seriously. It was just a sense of responsibility. Every day, during meals, the girl would come punctually and say warm words to him. He wonders why she acts like this with him. He asks Shulba if only people with the Note surname can attend the monthly meeting. Shulba replies in affirmation, and so Julian ushers him to go. He says he is also a Note and has more than enough right to attend the meeting. Back in the present, Julian remarks how good he is with a slingshot. He goes on about how he was famous in his neighborhood, especially when he aimed at the birds' heads without a miss. He grabs Rosie's hands and asks why everyone is freaking out when the kid has not told a single lie. He asserts that money was his, not theirs. Their uncle was shocked he had heard that his nephew lost his memory. Previously he was always dressed so elegantly and followed the rules, but he seems quite disheveled now. Julian warns them not to touch his sister. Monica requests to add another point. Confused, Julian asks who the woman with such a sinister look is. Rosie reveals she is their aunt. Monica says it is related to Julian's punishment, as he brought a weapon into the meeting room, which is prohibited. His uncle agrees and suggests he stay at the villa in the south as punishment. Rosie quivers. She had done everything to keep her brother here. If he leaves the mansion, she does not know when he will come back. She is brought back to reality as Julian grabs her hand and faces the relatives. They all unite against Julian and suggest he be punished for breaking the rules. Just then, Count Caliban barges into the meeting room. He asks if everyone has become so spineless, trembling at the sight of a child's slingshot. The eldest son was shocked to see his father had returned so soon. Caliban reveals he came by ship. He then comments on how a shrewd businessperson never ignores a promising initial offer. He turns to Rosie saying he came to accept her offer. He hands her the bracelet. He then asks how she intends to compensate him. As anticipated, her grandfather's interest is piqued. In this empire, the temple's influence reigns supreme. Not even the imperial family nor the great four houses dare to openly defy them. But Count Note stands definitely opposed to this formidable power, at odds with the temple constantly teetering on the precipice of ruin. It is for this very reason that the Count prioritizes a singular aptitude above all others when evaluating his successors. That is the ability to navigate crises with adaptability itself in its purest form. Rosie explains how she initiated the preliminary arrangements for her marriage alliance with the Duchy of Dyfenril a few days ago. Should it come to fruition, its benefits to the house and to the Count would be immeasurable. The Count is shocked to hear about the marriage alliance. He is disgusted, asking if he is now reduced to bartering with his own granddaughter like a chattel for political leverage. He asks if this is the compensation she dares to propose. He points out how Julian will be filled with rage when his memories return, and he grasps this. Rosie had not imagined the Count would react with such unrestrained fury, but this is not yet over. She explains that if this offering displeases him, he should let her present another form of recompense. What remains to be proven is her capacity to manage and overcome crises. She points out how he received her letter and, acting upon its implications, chose the sea route. Consequently, he successfully circumvented the landslide, thereby conserving a significant measure of his invaluable time. She asks if this outcome is sufficient compensation for a mere seashell bracelet. As he himself so often proclaims, your time is beyond measure, beyond price. The Count remains speechless. It is true that no mortal can foresee the capricious whims of nature under the certain fury of a landslide. Rosie showed that her grandfather would recognize in her actions not a mere chance but deliberate adaptability. Her initial payment having been rejected with such vehemence, Rosie swiftly pivoted, leveraging the unforeseen circumstances to her advantage, presenting a revised proposition. She is sure to gain her grandfather's interest if this gambit succeeds. Caliban smiles and bursts into laughter. He turns to Julian and remarks how he has been concealing a true powerhouse within his ranks all this time. The eldest son protests that the child has squandered a staggering 137 billion gold on magic stones. She has recklessly depleted an immense fortune on frivolous pursuits. The Count says that Rosie probably does not have that kind of fortune herself and questions if this is Julian's inheritance. The elder son agrees, saying the child effectively vaporized it all. Royston then joins in the argument, pointing out how the girl is from the temple and cannot be trusted. Julian grows annoyed and asks, what brand of inventive nonsense is this now? Rosie could see they were stooping to attack her very origins, and they dared to implicate even her brother in their poisonous accusations. She realizes this suffocating atmosphere is the reason her brother shielded her in the annex. She could not believe her brother was surrounded by all these individuals. They are so cunning and consumed by greed. She wonders how a 19-year-old Julian arrived at this mansion and navigated through this treacherous court. She feels dejected as she thinks of the corrosive malice her brother must have faced here, enough to make him shield her so fiercely, and never introduce her to these predators. But Rosie is determined not to falter or break. She will endure. She swears she has no allegiance to the temple. She asks Royston to present the slingshot to their grandfather directly so he can examine the so-called weapon himself. She plans to rise and prevail just like her brother did. Royston shows it, and the Count turns enraged. He calls Royston a fool for standing before him wearing clothes made from Etone, who is indirectly supporting the temple right now. The Count realizes the girl did it on purpose, and he grows amused. He dismissed the matter of spending the wealth and turned to Rosie. He tells her to attend the main family's breakfast from tomorrow. Rosie is happy that her grandfather has finally acknowledged her. Julian suggests they should come together from now on for the monthly meetings. He confesses that he does not know what a happy family is like, but they are in the same boat and should stick together. He says that neither of them had any luck with family. Rosie's eyes sparkled at the familiar words. She wonders why, even though he does not remember the past. He also took her side earlier without even knowing anything. Even though he is not exactly like the older brother she remembers, the brother in front of her now still cares about her. She wipes her tears, knowing they are getting closer again. From this moment on, she is sure many things will change. After all, she is not alone anymore. However, Zahid's aunt, Elizabeth, reveals how she is looking for a proposal for him again. Despite his frustration, he is unable to do anything. According to Daifinrol's family rule, the engagement of a minor head of the family can be decided through an agreement between the acting head and the elders. In emergencies, the fiancé holds a position equivalent to a spouse. Every woman Elizabeth tries to push on him as a fiancé has children. At this rate, Zahid will completely lose his mind before he even becomes an adult. When that happens, Elizabeth will make one of those children the heir of Daifinrol. Of course, before that, if Zahid refuses at the final approval stage, he can still break off the engagement. That is why she has placed an enormous penalty fee on the engagement contract. If Zahid cancels the engagement, Elizabeth will pocket the penalty fee whether he gets engaged or not. She is scheming to take over the family. Zahid asserts that Daifinrol will never belong to her even if he has to be the last head of this family. Elizabeth feigns a smile and says he should try to see it through to the end. She then reveals how his next fiancé will be decided in the upcoming Senate meeting. She shoves him, yelling how his stubborn pride is just like that of his dead father. She said he would not be treated this poorly as the heir of the family if he had just knelt and sworn to obey. But Zahid would rather just die. However, he still has things he needs to protect. He has to keep the Daifinrol family and the divine beast safe. His fiancé has been decided without his consent. Even knowing he will have to pay a massive penalty, he still has to write the annulment papers. He knows Aunt Elizabeth is not the only one who wants to use him, and more people will keep showing up. There is no one he can trust in this place, and yet he hates himself for being too weak to even walk properly. He stares at his parents' portraits, confessing how he misses them. In the meanwhile, Rosie ponders over how there must be plenty of marriage proposals besides hers. Zahid lost his parents in an instant and became the head of the family as a child. Now, his aunt, the real power holder, is using his engagement as a business deal. Rosie wants to save him as soon as possible, but the cards she holds right now are too weak. She hoped he would wait a little longer. It's not much longer now. Her thoughts get distracted as she hears yelling noises. Upon asking, Rosie explains how her grandfather has 4 children. She elaborates on the family tree. She reveals that Royston is scolding Uncle Felide's son, Ethan, who is around 13. Rosie could tell Ethan was used to Royston taking out his anger on him. Rosie interjects and tells Royston to stop. She warns him to stop harassing people for no reason. She suggests he play with his brother instead, frightening Royston. And so, he flees the scene. Ethan thanks Rosie. Rosie already knew the kid's future. Right now he looks like a scrawny, weak pushover. But one day he will become the greatest archmage in the Empire. Ethan is the only son of Rosie's second uncle, Felide, but he spent his childhood without receiving much attention. His mother passed away right after giving birth to Ethan. As for his father, a womanizer, he was not devoted to his family. And so, the always lonely child locked himself in his room and became an oddball who only read magic books. Seeing Ethan like that, Felide ignored him even more, saying he had no potential as an heir. Then Royston also started to bully him. After all, he was a loner with no one to complain to. The boy, unnoticed in the Count's family, eventually left the mansion at 15 and headed to the magic tower. It was because he had always admired magic, or perhaps it was because he had a natural talent for it. After several years, Ethan's talent blossomed, and he became the Empire's greatest archmage. When the boy entered the magic tower, he severed ties with his family. After that, he never involved himself in Note's affairs. He was a cousin whom Rosie neither liked nor disliked, but watching Royston torment him felt too familiar, and she wanted to help. She asks Ethan if this happens often. Ethan says it has been like this since childhood, and it is nothing special. Everyone except the grandfather knows. This shocks Rosie, and she asks if her brother also knew. Ethan calmly agrees. He reveals how once Royston beat him like a dog. But Julian walked past, whistling, without even glancing at him while carrying a bunch of gifts for Rosie. Julian is shocked to hear this. Ethan says he expected this from Julian, who trampled over everyone to become the heir. As soon as he got here, after being badly treated by their relatives, Julian walked an even darker path to defeat the demons. But Ethan points out how the man seems a bit different now. Rosie remembers how her brother got furious the moment he saw Royston bullying Ethan even though he did not know much about the boy. But after hearing Ethan's side, Rosie cannot deny he had serious flaws. Ethan comments on how if one loses something, they gain something. Looking at it, Julian lost his memory but instead gained the chance to fix his terrible personality. Julian stares at him, wondering why he feels like he's getting scolded even though he saved the boy. Ethan trembles as he points to the now broken shell bracelet. He asks what she will do now as grandfather put in a lot of effort to make it. He says seeing it broken will not make him happy and will think Rosie handled it carelessly. Rosie knew Ethan was right. It is practically the first gift her grandfather gave her. Ethan says it is all because of him. Julian denies it and says it is because of Royston, but they do not have any evidence. Julian smirks and tells her not to worry, as he could not have gone far. He suggests dragging him back and beating him. Rosie remains stunned and asks what this logic is. Union explains that this is how he has always handled things, and the beating is the best medicine for scumbags. But Rosie convinces him not to do so. She says she has thought of an even greater plan and tells Ethan to blame himself as the one at fault, as someone else. She then tells him to look forward to tomorrow's breakfast. With this, the video ends. Will Rosie be able to protect her loved ones? Will Julian Note regain his memories and take his responsibilities as the heir once again? Stay tuned for more.